Now, I use a term, a phrase called arbitrage all the time. And that's ultimately what he's claiming that you're doing. He's saying you can pay 4% to borrow against your policy. And because of the indexing component and the upside cap of 10%, you're going to earn the spread above that to the tune of assuming a 6.4% rate. So he's baking in with his calculations a 2.4% arbitrage on all the money that you're borrowing over a long period of time. Now, one of the things he bragged about was this concept that he came up with. And he talked to me about how he went from company to company to company, and every company told him, no, you're not allowed to do that here. You're not allowed to do that here. You're not allowed to do that here. And finally, he found a company that said, okay, go for it, right? And so they were obviously desperate for business. Hey, what's going on, cash flow hackers? It's Chris with Life 180. And for this video, we're gonna be talking about Curtis Ray, his maximum premium indexing strategy, which is MPI. And ultimately, I'm gonna give you my opinion, and I'm gonna do an evaluation and a breakdown about how MPI works, whether I think it's good or bad, and we're gonna go from there. So full transparency, I just got done reading this book again. I went through it just to do an evaluation. I've been thinking about making this video for a long time. And before I get started, I wanna put it out there that, you know what, at the end of the day, as critical as I'm gonna be, I actually think Curtis is a good guy. You know, I actually agree with him with about 95% of what he says. However, you're gonna soon find out why I think the MPI strategy is extremely dangerous as a retirement plan. And while I think it's important to also tell you that this is strictly my opinion, I think that what Curtis is doing is dangerous. It's hazardous to the industry and all the people who are participating in it. So I also want to give a full disclaimer that I met with Curtis. I actually live about 20 minutes from him. And my belief is that Curtis is a good guy. Like I believe he believes in what he's doing. That was the challenging part for me. I mean, I met with him almost a year ago at this point, right? And so that was the hardest part for me with this, as I reconciled and I went back and forth and I made this video. Is I actually, I don't want this to be a disparaging thing about his character, because I think he's a good guy. He means well, but he just doesn't know what he doesn't know. And so I'm gonna get into why I feel about all that stuff as we go through this video. So here's the overall problem. When you look at what Curtis Ray is doing on a spreadsheet with the MPI, it looks awesome, it works. So here's the problem. When you look at what Curtis Ray is doing on the spreadsheets and the MPI plans, they look fantastic, right? They work. But the problem is this: life doesn't exist on a spreadsheet, and there are way too many variables that pretty much ensure that the only guarantee with the MPI plan is that what's shown to you on your MPI illustration will not be what you get for returns. Now, before I get into anything else, I want to tell you a little bit about my background. I used to be the head of business development for a Fortune 1000 life insurance company that focused on index universal life companies. Now, while I did not work with the company that Curtis represents, which is Mutual of Omaha, I think it's important to understand that I have a real deep understanding about how index universal life policies work, where the risks are, where the challenges are, where they work, where they don't, what the expectations are. And a lot of people think that I'm an IUL hater. I'm not an IUL hater because I think IUL actually has its use case. The problem is I hate the way that IULs are sold because they're the most improperly sold financial tool on the face of the earth. That I can say. And, you know, while I think IULs are dangerous as a retirement investment vehicle because of the risks that they bring with them, what Curtis is doing with MPI exponentiates the danger that's associated with them. So I think that's really important, because when you find somebody who is doing what he's doing and it's gone against the grain, he thinks what he's doing is heroic, and you know, and he's found the secret loophole in the system, but the reality is he's not. And like I said before, while this is my opinion, I think he's really putting himself in the crosshairs for a lot of trouble with clients moving forward. I've done videos on Doug Andrews before, the class action lawsuits that Doug Andrew went through after his last book, Misfortune, and the class action lawsuit that ensued, I would not be surprised if something happens like that to Curtis Ray. Once again, just my opinion, but this is a buyer beware situation. So hopefully you're able to go through this video, find it to be objective, find it to be educational, and whatever decision that you make, at least it's an educated decision with a different perspective. All right, so first of all, let's talk about what MPI is. So what MPI is a specifically designed IUL policy, Index Universal Life Policy. That's the basic of it. And like I said, while I'm not an IUL fan, and you can learn by watching my IUL training playlist, that'll give you all the details about why they're dangerous. What makes it MPI is actually what makes it even worse than a regular IUL. I'll get into that in a bit. Second, let's take a look at how Curtis Ray says MPI works, and then I will break it down from here. So this is how Curtis says it works. Earnings are tied to an index. So you buy an Index Universal Life policy and your earnings are tied to an index. And he claims on TikTok and other social sites that he can earn 6.4% as a long-term assumption in that investment. He also claims that the properly structured MPI plan has an upside potential of 10% with a downside protection of 0%, meaning that you can't lose your money. It's protected at 0. He also says that you can leverage a RELOC, which is a retirement equity line of credit, right? The idea is that you can take this RELOC, borrow at an assumed rate. He uses 4% in most of his videos that I've seen, and earn an additional spread that the policy is earning as additional returns in the account. Now, I use a phrase called arbitrage all the time, and that's ultimately what he's claiming that you're doing. He's saying you can pay 4% to borrow against your policy, and because of the indexing component and the upside cap of 10%, you're gonna earn the spread above that to the tune of assuming a 6.4% rate. So he's baking in with his calculations a 2.4% arbitrage on all the money that you're borrowing over a long period of time. And it really is a dangerous, dangerous assumption. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go through and do an entire breakdown and assessment of MPI, how it works, if it works, which I kind of told you it doesn't already, but ultimately show you why that's the case, and what some of the key components to consider as you're making your decision are. The first thing I want to do as I go through and break this down is kind of show you the MPI calculator and the assumptions that he's working off of in this calculator. I'm going to go through, I'm going to put in a 40-year-old desired retirement income age of 65, current annual income, I'm just going to put 100,000, desired retirement income, I'm going to, so here's the thing, I'm going to put 100,000, but here's the bottom line. That doesn't account for inflation. So if we were to take inflation into account 25 years from now, we're pretty much gonna have to double this number. So I'm actually gonna put in 200,000 because once again, it's not a matter of the money that we have, it's a matter of our quality of life, our standard of living. And you know, when you take inflation into account, that's what we have to deal with. Lump sum amount, I'm gonna say 0. Ongoing monthly contributions, I'm gonna put $1,500 a month. Okay, and that gets to $18,000 a year. I guess I could get to $20,000 a year. Let's see if I do that. I think $1,750 will get me to that. Yeah, something like that. So we'll just do that. Okay, so look at that. It gets me to 201,000 there. And then he's got this whole play out here. So what I'm going to do is go down here and I'm going to read these disclaimers. So the projected contributions are estimated amounts. I don't need to read all this for 18 years and older. Good disclaimer. So the benefits, okay, so this is where I want it to be shown right here. The benefits and values shown above are not guaranteed. Important to understand. MPI results calculated. Oh, actually, before I go there, I'm gonna state this. Not only are they not guaranteed, I'm going to show you why later that they're never going to happen. This will never perform. Your MPI plan will never perform according to what he's showing in this calculator. This is just a smoke and mirrors tool, folks. MPI, I'm going to highlight this again. MPI results calculated using a 6.4% average return annually. Expenses calculated from a state insurance department approved illustration for preferred health rated male with a loan rate of 4% in the MPI match program. Now it's important to understand, one of the things that I want to talk about is when you run an illustration and you run loans in the illustration, the most they legally allow you to build in is 0.5%. So they bake in 0.5% of positive arbitrage on loans, meaning if your loan rate was 4%, what they're going to allow you to do is earn 4.5% in the policies. That's still, I think, a risky assumption based on the other variables at play that I'll get into. But what he's doing already is making assumptions in the calculator that you're not even allowed to do in an illustration, which is dangerous. I don't see how it's compliant, and I don't see how Mutual of Omaha lets him get away with it, honestly. So the MPI distributions, retirement income, and other uses can be tax-free and may not be exposed to capital gains tax. That's true as long as you're using loans. The assumptions on which they are built are subject to change according to market returns, health rating, inflation rates, and other variables. Actual results may be more or less favorable. This presentation is not valid unless accompanied by a complete insurance company illustration. Please see the full illustration for guaranteed values and other important information. So here's the deal. This is important to understand, guys. As you look through the illustrations and you run illustrations with income, that's where you can get into a lot of trouble. Now, once again, you bake in positive arbitrage in the illustrations. I don't know why they allow people to do that, because it is extremely dangerous. But what we're going to do is we're going to get into some of the details now of these policies. All right, so let's talk about the major dangers of using IUL as a product in general, because I think it's important to know that before we get into the MPI stuff, we have to talk about IUL as a product at the beginning of it. Let's talk about the fact that the 6.4% assumption that he's making isn't what's actually being earned inside the policy. Now, real assumptions inside of any good IUL policy as far as long-term internal rate of return are going to be more in the 4.5% to 5% range. And that may not seem like a lot, but the difference between the two is absolutely catastrophic when it comes to the desired outcome for your MPI plan if you were to decide to do it or if you currently have one. In fact, this is really the crux of everything. If the long-term internal rate of return were higher in real terms, then the MPI concept would work, right? But the facts are it doesn't, and it can't work long-term. And the biggest problem with that is Curtis himself tells you that this needs to be a long-term plan. And as I'm telling you, as I go through this and you start to see all the moving parts, it's gonna scare you. Now, the second thing to talk about here is the fact that Curtis has marketed the MPI on TikTok and other social media channels with an assumed rate of 6.4% because that's what Mutual of Omaha would allow agents to run and illustrate the policies for as far as assumptions go. However, they have since dropped their cap rate and thus have reduced the 6.4% to 6.2%. Once again, may not seem big, but it is much bigger than you realize. The problem is Curtis is still marketing it at the 6.4%. In my opinion, it's not a good look. The third point that I'd like to make, and I think this is an important one, is just really more about common sense, right? So one of the things I always like to tell people is that common sense goes a long ways when you're trying to think about what are the real, likely, long-term internal rates of return for an index universal life policy. And here's what I can tell you. If you understand how insurance companies operate, when you have money and you're putting money into a deposit with the insurance company, you have money in the cash value of your IUL policy. That money isn't really in your policy. It's sitting inside of the general fund, the general account of the life insurance company. And if you think about it, the general fund of the life insurance company doesn't have it isn't making a lot of money. It's earning about 4 to 4.5% right now. So right now, if you know that Mutual of Omaha is earning under 5% in their general fund, common sense tells me that if this strategy was so good, in a world where they're having a hard time getting even 5%, why wouldn't they just be taking this strategy and utilizing it for their entire general fund? Because the answer is it doesn't work. And if the MPI agent that you're talking to really would slow down and use common sense, I think they would understand this. And my challenge is that they just don't understand how these products work in general. And I get it. When I first started in the industry, I was all about IULs because I didn't know what I didn't know. And when you look at them on the surface level, they're fantastic. I sold a lot of IUL premium until I kind of saw the light and realized that they weren't all they're cracked up to be. All right, so what's important to understand, I want to go through this from a functional perspective so you understand how Index Universal Life works in general. That once again, this is not MPI specific, this is just IUL specific, but the fact that IUL is the core foundation of what MPI is built upon, you need to understand this. And so here's what happens. So let me put it this way. Building assumptions on how this works and what expectations are. What most people think of, and I'm just going to draw this on my iPad here for you. So what most people think for IULs is they think, okay, if I have a 0 to 10%, I'm protected at 0, I could earn up to 10%. So anything above 10%, I get 0 of. Anything below 0, I'm protected, right? So that's what people think of. So they think they're kind of in this sweet spot. And the problem is most people think that companies are able to do that because they think the insurance company is keeping anything above that, above the 10%, for instance, in this cap rate, would go to the insurance company, right? So most agents with that logic, they say, well, if that's the case in a bull market, how could they ever reduce the cap rate here, right? This is the cap rate, the 10%. How could they ever reduce that? I'm going to explain this to you in a second. The reality is this is not how it works at all. If you're going to buy these things, it's important to understand that when you are getting involved with the IUL policy and they're talking about participating in the S&P 500 index, you're never really buying the S&P 500 index. What you're doing is you're getting options inside of the S&P 500. So what happens is, this is what happens. If you have $10,000 in an account, what's going to happen is the life insurance company will say, you know what, we know that our general fund is going to earn 4.5%, right? So we know that the general fund, I'm going to put GF for general fund, is going to earn 4.5%. So what they do is they say, okay, your $10,000 cash, and mind you, there's going to be insurance charges above this, but I'm just trying to talk about the cash value inside of your policy and how it functions and how you participate in the index. They say the 4.5% is what you're going to earn. So they say, okay, that 4.5% is going to be $450. We know that your account, that your $10,000 sitting inside of our general account that's earmarked to you is going to earn a return of $450. So how do they get you the 10% cap and the 0% floor? They take this $450 and they buy call options, okay? So they buy those call options, and that's what happens. Then what happens there is if the option wins, then you get a return, right? So you spend the $450, and if you win, you get 10% return on the deposit. So you'd get $1,000, right? In that situation. And if you lose, you end up with 0. So you lose the $450, right? So that would be the 0 because they're taking what they know they're going to earn with the $10,000 and they're just putting it at risk. And if you lose it, you lose at 0 and you get up to 10%. Now here is why cap rates, if you've watched the market, and why cap rates have even gone down since Curtis and I had our first meeting when he told me cap rates weren't going to drop very much. And I insisted that they were, and that was the biggest risk that was involved here. Because if a cap rate goes down, think about it this way. If you have a 10% cap rate and it goes down to 9.5%, right? That's a 5% drop, but that compounds. I mean, that really, it has a a really big impact on the illustrative rates of the IUL policies, because if you know how IULs work, based on the assumptions that you're seeing in the IUL illustration that you see, when those performances go down a little bit, what happens is every year your cost of insurance is going up, and every single year you have a situation where the net amount at risk in the policy is what your charges are based on, right? And so if the performance is going down and your cost of insurance is going up every year, because it's basically annual renewable term, right? So the bigger the net amount at risk as you get older, especially for older people, these are extremely, and when I say older, I mean 50 and up, these are extremely dangerous policies, because you're talking about getting involved in a retirement plan based on how it's being sold to you that have huge surrender schedules, right? So if you're 50 and you buy into this and it has a 10-year surrender schedule, then what's going to happen is every 2 years he's going to have you be buying into this. So before you know it, you're going to be getting to retirement and you're still going to have a lot of your money lumped in to surrender schedules that you're not going to be able to access, right? So I think that's important to understand. This is the foundation of how IULs work. If you don't understand this, now the question is, why are cap rates dropping? Well, cap rates are dropping right now because back in 2011, there were a handful of companies. There were less than 20 companies. Now there are over 80 companies that are in the IUL market, right? So here's the deal. If you understand how options work, right? If you get how options work, what happens is it's a supply and demand issue. The more people trying to bid and compete for the same options that are available, the more expensive those options get. So that as popular as IULs have become, the insurance industry has caused their own problem, right? And so what's happened is they've started driving the price up. And so even in the midst of the greatest bull market run that we've ever had, companies are driving cap rates down. The results of these IUL policies have gone down and down and down and been worse and worse and underperformed. Even in this great bull run, they've done okay. People haven't really seen the bad side of it, because the bottom line is we've been positive. But the problem is when we have a couple negative years coming up, because cap rates have dropped, they're not going to be able to make up for it, right? And that's the key thing. And so what's happened now is that we have all these companies in there, so the cost of options have gone up. So the amount of options, the amount of call options, or the value of the call options that the 450 in this example would have gotten you is now far less valuable. So that's the problem. So there are multiple stresses going on in the insurance company. So there are multiple stresses going on when it comes to the insurance company. You have the general fund return, so we're going to call that 4.5%. So this can go up or down. So this is a stress, right? If that goes up, if that goes down, then the return that you're going to get on your money will buy you less call options. And then the call option price is another stress, right? Because if there's more competition to buy the same call options, that goes up. So the double negative is if the interest rates go down and the call option prices go up, which is what's happened in this bull market, the performance, the cap rates have to come down. That's just the math of it, folks. And if you look around history, look at Pac Life, look at Mutual of Omaha, look at Midland, look at North American, look at all these different companies. It's the same thing over and over and over again. You're going to see the same results. I mean, it doesn't matter. Transamerica, Allianz, Nationwide, all these companies, they're doing the same stuff. I could go on and on and on. Cap rate reduction is just part of the game. And what's even more dangerous, and this is one thing I got to give Mutual of Omaha credit for, is other companies are building proprietary indexes, right? Which is really, really dangerous, because they're building these proprietary indexes with a 30-year look back period, and they're basically cherry picking funds that look like they're performing well, but they'll say past performance is not indicative of future results, yet then they speak out of both sides of their mouth and they cherry pick these past indexes and past mutual funds or funds to show a performance, and they try to make it look, they basically manufacture a result so they can illustrate it at a certain rate, And it's, to me, it's just smoke and mirrors once again, and it's very manipulative. And when it comes to your personal finances and when it comes to your financial future, it's extremely dangerous. So now I've covered the dangers of index universal life in general. Once again, I haven't covered all of the dangers. I just wanted to touch on kind of the surface level important things to understand. If you want more details on the challenges and dangers of an IUL, make sure you look at the playlist. I have an index universal life training playlist, really designed more for agents to be awoken by, to wake up and realize what is going on with index universal life policies, and why they're not what they were told they were to begin with. It's important for them to understand, because I know a lot of IUL agents out there who are really good people trying to do really good things for people, but they're just not educated. So if you want to see that, make sure you look at the card above in the top corner. You can go check that out, watch that playlist, and I think it'll be extremely, extremely helpful for you. If you're a customer who's looking at doing this, before you buy any IUL with anybody, make sure you watch that playlist, you know it inside and out, and go from there, because if you don't, you're going to regret it. So now that I've covered the IUL stuff, what I want to talk about is the dangers of the actual MPI strategy itself. And really the dangers of the MPI strategy itself center around the concept of the RELOC, the retirement equity line of credit. Now, quite frankly, I got to say this, I am blown away that Mutual of Omaha is actually allowing him to do this. Now, essentially what you're doing is you're borrowing against the policy value every 2 years. You're taking a loan against your policy, and you're buying a new policy with that money. Now, when I spoke with him, one of the things he bragged about was this concept that he came up with. And he talked to me about how he went from company to company to company, and every company told him, no, you're not allowed to do that here. You're not allowed to do that here. You're not allowed to do that here. And finally he found a company that said, okay, go for it, right? And so they were obviously desperate for business, and it was what it was. Now, I don't know all the details of that. I'm simply repeating to you what he said to me in our meeting. Now, here is problem number one of the RELOC. It requires you to maintain your health, because your ability to participate in a RELOC means you have to requalify for insurance every 2 years. So if something happens to you, if you were to get diabetes, if you were to have a bad accident, if you become disabled for any reason, it's going to blow up your ability to execute on an MPI plan. And here's what I know. You're 70% more likely to become disabled, to become disabled before you're 65 than you are to die, right? So if you're talking about creating a plan that effectively tells you you're dealing with a lot more risk, right? Like you're more likely to become disabled than you are to die. And in that scenario, if you become disabled, you're not going to qualify for this plan to be executed. It can put you in a lot of trouble, with the plan itself. Now, I'm sure there are other components of it. If you qualify, he's going to say there are living benefits that go along with it. But the problem is the qualification for the living benefits inside of an IUL, if they even go there, the qualification inside of the living benefits rider, the ABR for an IUL, are much more challenging, difficult to qualify for than like disability through Social Security or something like that. And that's where a lot of policy buyers kind of misinterpret or misunderstand. They think, oh, well, if I get disabled, I'm going to have access to these ABRs, these living benefits. And I'm telling you, I've heard more horror stories about people assuming they were going to be able to rely on those. They can be great, don't get me wrong, for the right thing. If you get catastrophically ill, you get cancer, diagnosed with a terminal illness or something like that, in that scenario, accelerated benefit riders are amazing. But when it comes to disability, they can be super, super misleading and challenging. The next thing to understand is that you're using an indexed loan. Now, he uses an example of paying 4% but earning 6.4% in the results. Once again, I said this earlier, you cannot even do that on an illustration. If you show an indexed loan on the illustration, it's going to show him, because of regulation AG 49A, you are not allowed to illustrate any more than 0.5% of positive arbitrage on the upside. So if you take an index loan out on the policy, it's going to only give you 0.5% of positive arbitrage. And that, once again, is risky on its own. So there's two components here that I have a problem with, is the 4%, which, by the way, the index loan in what he's doing is a 4% with a 6% cap. And so I don't think it will ever go above 6 from what I understand. And so while that is actually good in a higher interest rate environment, so I'll give it credit for that cap exists, the problem is he's using 6.4%. Once again, the illustrated value already reduced to 6.2% according to Mutual of Omaha, right? And the calculation in the calculator that he's using to sell it is just misleading because you can't even illustrate it, right? So, and he kind of talks about it in the disclaimers below, right? Where he says, none of this matters except for the results accompanied by the illustrative rate. So he uses this as a bait and switch sales tactic and tool to get you in to see it. And then I'm sure they use all the salespeople to kind of close you on everything to get you to buy into it. And I'm just here to kind of give you a tale of caution to understand what you're getting involved with. Now, the other thing that goes along with this is that it's important to understand that when the market is negative, IULs are sold as having a 0% floor. Now, while true, it is accurate, like it's got a 0% floor on the investment side based on how they buy options and participate in the index, like I kind of explained to you a minute ago. It's not true as far as the cash value side goes, because when the market goes below 0 or even at 0, whether it's 0 or negative, there's still a cost of insurance and there are still other fees and charges associated with the policy, which effectively brings a real performance negative in the policy. So I think that's really important to understand. That is not talked about at all by Curtis and his team from anything I've seen. And that's where index loans get worse and worse, and why the assumptions of the MPI are flat out dangerous and misleading, right? So when MPI plan has a 0 or a negative year, and you have loans out on it, because the loans compound the problem, right? Because if you have a negative year and you're protected at 0, but you have a 4% loan, so you have that 4% additional expense, the extra charges for the insurance on that 0 year, so those compound against it, so the net amount at risk for the insurance company goes up, and then it compounds and it can run away on you. And especially when you're using this for retirement income, this is the problem. When you're using it for retirement income, what people don't tell you is this is annual renewable term. I mean, I guess they do tell you that. But what they don't tell you is the fact that when you're 65 and up, especially when you're 70 and up, the cost of insurance goes through the roof. So if you have those negative years or a flat year and you have loans out on your policy and it's underperforming what the illustrated rate shows you, the cost of insurance go up and the net amount at risk is crazy high. I mean, it's insane how high it is. And it can literally 2 or 3 bad years in a 5 or 6 year period can completely blow up your policy. And if you're relying on that for tax-free income in retirement, it will be absolutely catastrophic for the results that you're going for in your life. Now, the other problem with the RELOC that I want to make sure I touch on is I've already mentioned it a little bit, it's the cap rates. Now, if cap rates drop, which cap rates, I would bet pretty much my life that the cap rates are going to drop more before they get better. It's that certain. Like I was talking about earlier, when the cap rates drop, the internal rate of return is going to struggle even more, right? So when the internal rate of return struggles, if you have that index loan out, that arbitrage that's baked into the illustrations is going to perform even worse than what it shows, right? Because when you have the good years, it's not going to be as good, and it may not seem significant, but I promise you it is. So here's my conclusion about the RELOC strategy. The only way that the RELOC strategy would work is if the real rate of return, the real internal rate of return after fees and everything of the policy was 6.4%. That's not the real rate of return, internal return in the policy. It's just not. The 6.4% is what the index is going to get. Then you have to back out all the charges, all the fees, all the everything. That's going to get it more into the 5% range after everything, net after all expenses. And when you think about that, It's just, he knows that. It's just misleading. The 6.4% as far as real return in the policy after fees is misleading because he's running the calculations without taking those fees into consideration. And if you were to pay on a negative year, if you were to pay the additional loan fees out of pocket in those negative years, which you're not going to do because it completely defeats the purpose of the point of an MPI plan, of getting retirement income and being able to be safe and not having to be exposed to having to spend money like that. So you're not going to do that. But if you were to able to have the real rate of return, the internal rate of return at 6.4%, and you were willing to come out of pocket and deal with the additional loan fees and the expenses on the negative years, it could work. But the reality is nobody's going to do that. Very few people are going to be in a position to be able to handle that, even if they wanted to in retirement. And so at the end of the day, once again, this is just my opinion. I am going to go out there on a limb and say that there are going to be a lot of people who are in really rough shape with this MPI stuff as time goes on here. It's just, it looks good for a short period of time. The problem is it's smoke and mirrors. They have a long surrender schedule. So the challenge is, he says it's a long-term plan because of that surrender schedule. If you have $20,000 that's working for you, the surrender value is probably $8,000. So you've lost $12,000 liquidity of your money in the first couple of years. And so what do? You start saying, well, I'm in for a penny, in for a pound. I've got this money. The only way I'm going to get that $12,000 back is by keeping the plan going. And what happens is, as you start throwing good money after bad, the surrender schedule gets better, but what happens is the more time goes on, the more they start reducing your cap rates, the more they start increasing the charges, and the worse the policy starts to perform. So you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. So it's a really, really dangerous proposition to get involved with. And that's why I say I would stay away from it. I always kind of tell people that I wouldn't touch this with a 30-foot pole, like people that I've talked to personally. It's in my opinion that I wouldn't touch this with a 30-foot pole. And also, within the next couple of years, these policies are going to have a lot of problems because we've been, like I said, going through a bull run, and I think that bull run is going to be coming to an end. The reality is, just to kind of recap this, Curtis is a decent guy. I really think Curtis believes in what he's doing, and that's the sad part to me. Unfortunately, he feels like he cracked the code, in that he has figured out something that other people weren't smart enough to see. And the reality is, it's not a very complex thing if you understand the industry, to see that if you want to play a bit of a shell game and mix with numbers with math that aren't real, then it can look really good. And it's a great marketing tool. It works well on TikTok. And if I didn't understand the product so well, I could see why people are buying into kind of the myth of it. But the reality is, he's got very minimal industry experience before he even launched the MPI program. He doesn't have a decade of experience in the financial industry. He was a new guy that came to this from a completely different industry. I think it was like a flooring company is what he did before this. So all of the assumptions that he makes around MPI plans are based on absolute best case scenarios of IUL planning coming to fruition. And the reality is, that's never going to happen. These are half-baked ideas. They're never going to work the way that he says they're going to. And I think it's really important that people understand this. But I do want to reiterate, I got to say, when I read this book, I agreed with almost everything he said, I think up until like page 70, right? So if Curtis and I were to spend a day talking with each other, which we spent a lunch talking with each other, we'd probably agree about 95% of things. But where he goes wrong, in my opinion, is that the solution to the problem that's going on in the world is MPI. And I've shared with you why I feel that way at this point in time. So at this point in time, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of haters, a lot of love, a lot of people with a lot of questions. So leave your comments below. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit that bell, because I got a lot of videos coming out on this. This is not going to be the last video. I'm going to do a deeper dive. And listen, if you have any questions or comments, you think I missed something or whatever, include it down below. I don't want this to just be a hate video on Curtis Ray. That is not the point of this video. The point of this video is to educate people that Index Universal Life is dangerous in general. MPI is extremely dangerous, in my opinion. And that's really what I'm trying to do, is to protect people, because I believe so much in properly structured life insurance when leveraged properly, when used as a savings alternative, not an investment alternative. Life insurance should never be an investment in and of itself. So that is important to understand. If that doesn't make sense to you, if that comment doesn't make sense to you, leave a comment in the section below. I will respond to you. I will help make it more clear for you. And I'm sure I'm going to be making more videos on this. So make sure you subscribe. That way when I make them, you are notified and can learn more, can engage more, and we can go from there. So lastly, just know that this is by no means the most comprehensive breakdown, but I will say it covered the most important foundational fundamentals, I would say, of what the MPI is, the key components that you really need to understand about the facts about how MPI works, and ultimately what Curtis and his team are never going to tell you when you meet with them. So buyer beware. I hope you found this valuable. I hope you found it educational. And that's it for now. I hope you have a blessed, inspirational day, and we'll talk soon. Take care.